Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to welcome you to this regional update on Europe. We have, in a way, a strange setup in this room. Perhaps you are not familiar with it either. I think it is based upon the House of Commons or House of Lords in the UK. So you should feel free to behave as they do, meaning you express your opinion. If you want to scream or shout or whatever, feel free to do so. My first proposal would be perhaps you can move a bit closer, because I don't expect perhaps too many additional people to come. They may be busy with other things, and then we will have a more intense discussion among ourselves, and you are all very much encouraged to contribute. Now, let me just in a few words present myself and the panelists. My name is Svein Østveit. I work for UNESCO in the field of education, and I've been with that organization for a very long time. I'm the Director of Executive Office, Program Coordination, and Budget and Human Resource Management. We have two panelists with us. There were supposed to be three, but we are two. First, Ms. Anna Maria Ajello, who is full professor and president, University of Rome, in Valsi in Italy. Very pleased to have you here. And then we also have Mr. Mehul Sangrashka. It will improve along the way, I hope. Who is the CEO of Learning Possibilities, based in UK. So what we will do, there are more people coming in, which is very good. Please move up in this direction. I feel a bit awkward here, I must say, even though perhaps it gives a lot of prominence to the moderator. I am not the final judge of what you say or what we agree on here, but I will do my best to at least animate what I hope will be a lively discussion. Now, Europe. And as you know, there will be similar, in parallel, events on the other regions in the world. Education in Europe, obviously, as you I'm sure you will agree, has a very strong tradition of many, many years of literacy for all, education for all, very strong commitment from governments, public education. So we have a long and clear and strong tradition. But, as we all know, there are several challenges. And we are going to discuss and listen to some of the shared concerns that you all have. But we will also then concentrate on looking at some of the possible solutions and new ideas and possible ways of education systems in Europe to perform better and respond better to some of the very significant challenges which Europe is facing these days. I think I can only mention a few. There are several issues, but perhaps the refugee crisis is one issue that comes to mind, where education systems obviously have a very, very important role to play. We have ongoing issues which is related to this on social inclusion and immigrants and migrations, which has taken place over several decades, and where we see clearly that children and students with an immigrant background perform much worse than those who are born in the country they go to school. Is particularly serious for boys, who perform much worse than girls, at least in primary and secondary school in Europe. We see that there is still a problem of employment, and too often, perhaps, education systems, particularly thinking of vocational educational training and higher education, do not necessarily, or not as good as it should be, provide the kind of skills that the employment sector is looking for, and that's another key challenge. Europe has slow economic growth since many, many years. And perhaps linked to that, several countries, I think it started in 2011, have cut the budget in education. That doesn't obviously make it easier to find solutions and to find ways of investing more, which is needed to make sure that new approaches, new innovative ideas, and more investments in a whole range of different areas can be taken care of. Now, teachers, as I think you will all agree, is the key actor in the education systems, being key when it comes to quality and relevance, and indeed also issues around social inclusion. And this is where 60% already of the budget goes to. Now, investment in teachers when it comes to their conditions, but also training, both initial training and in-service training, is key, again, to make sure that education systems will perform better. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of all the challenges. I just wanted to point out these few things for you. Perhaps one area which I didn't mention is the terrorist and attacks and the importance of education systems to help coming up with better solutions on prevention. This is a difficult task which all countries are struggling with. At UNESCO, 2 years ago, we launched something we call a global citizenship education, which also tries to address how education system can contribute better to making sure that citizens in the future can live and coexist and be part of finding solutions in a constructive and peaceful way. It requires a whole range of different skills. And again, teachers are key, curriculum and the whole system, so perhaps that's another important issue that we want to spend some time on discussing later on. With this, I would then first ask the two panelists to give, from their perspective, a presentation on what they consider are some of the key issues, but very much also looking at potential solutions that we can also look at later on. I will then first give the floor to Madame Ana Maria Aiello, please.
Good afternoon. I would like to speak with you about the problem that we face about evaluation and the different students that we have in our school. Italy, as you know, doesn't not have a long history in school system evaluation compared with the other Western society. Yet this actually allows us to acquire the experience on evaluation and, as we hope, to avoid some mistake and or difficulties. There are two themes that I would like to speak about the Italian evaluation system. One is the innovation in the school evaluation system, and one other is innovation in national student assessment. About the first theme, in Italy, in 2015, we introduced a national system for the evaluation of a school based upon a self-evaluation report format, articulated in 49 indicators, that each school has to fill in online and to upload on the public website of the Italian Ministry of Education. By compiling this format, school report on many aspects of everyday life: curricula, organizational practices, relationship with their surrounding environment, for instance, with the productive world, and so on. By doing this report, teachers are involved in a reflection about their professional practices and have to share this activity with their colleagues. There are two significant aspects that I like to stress. One is to start from the recognition of the professional role of the teachers also means that the Ministry of Education, the central administration, trust the teachers and promote their reflexivity. The second is to focus on schools' everyday life also means to re-establish their dignity and to take responsibility of the many different aspects which represent education at school. When we examined international literature on school effectiveness and school improvement, we didn't find conclusive evidence of a direct association between school self-evaluation and the student learning outcomes. Yet we know that a reflective professional who rethinks his or her practices and does this in collaboration with his or her colleagues is a prerequisite to improve student educational outcomes. Starting with this school here, preschool teachers are also required to fill in a preschool self-evaluation report format. As we all know, a good early start is important to achieve better educational and outcomes, and the Italian school system for this level of education has received a long-standing international recognition with Reggio Children, for instance. The second theme I'd like to address has to do with computer-based training, because next year we are going to make this innovation for the standardized test on reading and comprehension and math problem solving for grade 10, equivalent to the second year of upper secondary school in Italy. We chose to focus on these competencies because they represent cross-curricular competencies and also two of the European key competencies for lifelong learning and citizenship that all students need to master at the end of the compulsory school. In Italy, national paper and pencil standardized tests were introduced in 2008 with some difficulties concerning the relationship with teachers because they perceived the test to evaluate students' learning as a means to indirectly evaluate their own work. And in part, that is true. Nowadays, this feeling is decreasing. A characteristic of the Italian assessment is the attention to the specificity of the students. For instance, their blindness, if any, up to temporary difficulties, such as language barriers due to their recent immigration. Using computer-based testing will not only permit us to improve the efficiency of testing sessions, for instance, avoiding cheating, but also to articulate the test in different kinds of answers. In other words, computer-based tests make it possible to prepare different pathways to the right answer without lowering the standard of the test. From the cognitive point of view, it is a big challenge, but as in Valsi, we are ready to face it. Moreover, this opportunity is of utmost importance for the evaluation of the citizenship competencies, as they are very complex competencies to assess with one simple measure. Last but not least, I'd like to remind you of inclusivity as a fundamental characteristic of the Italian approach to evaluation, that, in our perspective, is a specific tool for improving schools and students' learning. I will demonstrate this with two exemplar practices. In Italy, there are two different schools. One in the north of Italy, I show, is there, and one other in the very south of Italy, in Mazara del Vallo, in Sicily. Since 2008 in the school, In Milan, Istituto Comprensivo Marcello Candia, a comprehensive institute enrolling students 6 to 13 years old, uses tests in the original language of migrants in order to assess which kind of cognitive process they are able to do in their native language before evaluating similar processes with tests in Italian. Starting this year, the school in Mazara del Vallo, named Paolo Borsellino, uses a translation of the Invalsi math test in Arabic and in French. I have a copy if you want to see. Nobody forced this school to administer the test in this way. They did it spontaneously. These practices clearly show how we pay attention to the initial differences in student competencies in order to take responsibility for them. If we don't care about these differences, we don't allow students to acquire citizenship competencies and, more dangerously, to send them the message of devaluing of their cultural identity.
Thank you very much to you, Madame Aiello, for explaining to us what seems to be a very promising project. And I think this has been going on for some time in Italy, and hopefully also other European countries are obviously struggling with this as well. There may be participants here who are also working in the same area, and I'm sure Madame Aiello would be happy to receive questions afterwards. But before that, we will listen to our second panelist, Mr. Mehul Sangraicha. Please, almost, I'm getting there. Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Collective responsibility in public education, for me, means that I think we have to ensure that education is relevant. And what do I mean by that? Well, this morning we heard Fareed in the plenary talk about the fact that for the first time growth in India is happening, but not because of manufacturing. And we heard Andreas talk about graduates who are unemployed. And when you put those together, what that says to me is that growth, not only in Europe, but elsewhere, happens because of the growth in service industries. And if that is the case, then a key part of that, a key component, is to have a capable population. A population that is skilled. One of the things Andreas went on to say this morning was that if you have skills, the opportunities you have today, we've never seen those sorts of opportunities before. And at the same time, UK is on the top of the league table for rote learning, where memorization, sitting in an exam room, and answering questions from memory, a scenario that you don't see anywhere else in the workspace, is the way that we test students. And what we do is put them through a process where learning is about exam preparation and learning is about memorizing how to answer questions. One of the things that always amazes me is that when exams happen, teachers look at the exam paper and smile if they recognize all the questions on the paper. Now, the reality of life is that life is about dealing with unexpected events and outcomes. So how are we preparing students if what we're doing is, asking them to memorize something and regurgitate it, and then saying, go out into the world and deal with, scenarios that you've never experienced before? So what is the answer to this? The answer for a long time has been thought to be technology. There are many projects globally where large numbers of devices, content have been put out there, and essentially what has happened is, after a while the novelty is worn off and things have continued. In parts of the UK, it's interesting that for many, many years, the government have been pushing digital learning, laptops for teachers, and yet, the UK is still at the top of the rote learning table. So what I wanted to come on to, because there are signs of hope, there are examples of how things are getting better, is to talk about a project that we're doing currently in Wales. The project is called HUB, HWB, which is Welsh for community. And it's a project that basically the government took on in 2012. Now, the reason they took this on is because in Wales, like in many other places, manufacturing has declined, and it is only the service industry that basically has prospects for growth. And you can attract companies to come to Wales if you give them tax incentives and if there is good infrastructure. But they recognize that there is a key third component, that if the learners, the students coming out of the education system had strong digital skills, that would make them highly attractive and highly employable, and that would attract inward investment companies to come to Wales. So as part and parcel of that, what they did was put a program together, which is a long 6-year program. Change doesn't happen overnight. And perhaps that's one of the problems with this, that most people who embark down this route don't realize that this is a process of change. We're trying to fundamentally change the education system, not just put laptops or tablets on desks and carry on as we've always done, which you see very often. So they looked at a long 6-year program, and the program was basically structured in a way that it looked at the whole education system holistically. So firstly, the first component obviously was to put the technology in. Schools have to be connected, there have to be devices in the classrooms. And through that process, we have connected all 1,700 schools, 500,000 teachers, 500,000 students and 80,000 teachers into a secure learning platform with content, with tools, and connected it to the school management systems and so on. So there is that infrastructure now is a lot easier because of cloud and because of the progress of technology. Having done that, the next task was to look at professional development. I think this is something that is usually ignored or forgotten. And quoting Sunny Vaki from this morning, that the solution out of the crisis in education is teachers that are well respected, well trained, and well paid. And I think the well trained is very important. And the reason it's very important is because teachers still come out of our teacher training colleges and universities learning how to teach as we have done for decades. We still haven't got fundamentally to understanding new pedagogies and understanding how to apply them in the classroom. And so we went through a huge program of training all of these teachers. And the problem with this, as those of you in the profession will know, is that teachers can't just take the time off. They still have the day job to do. And so, trying to organize and coordinate that was a huge effort. But the government recognized that without this, the technology would never achieve its potential. The next element is curriculum, because again, if you're going to bring digital skills into the classroom, the curriculum has to reflect that. They have to be part and parcel of the way of how you deliver education. And so the curriculum needed to be changed so that these tools and the way that they're used to collaborate, to do projects, to have critical thinking, some of the skills that have already been talked about are incorporated into the way teaching happens. And again, the idea of this is to encourage the teachers to then use the tools, because that is the only way they can deliver the curriculum. And then the last element, which perhaps is the most difficult, is our examination system. Because if you can have as much change as you like, in terms of technology and classroom, but if we continue to measure teachers using the same examination system that we have for decades, then ultimately all that will happen is teachers will revert back to teaching to that test. You know, if the students are passing with grade A's, why should I change the way I teach, is the comment I always get. And so in terms of the examination system, the thing that is critical with this, which is something that the government of Wales has embarked on, is how do you build a skills framework? How do you assess at each age whether a student is collaborative, whether they can analyze critically, whether they are good at communication, because these things aren't easily measured on a piece of paper and pencil. So having a framework, which is something that we hope is going to come into force next year, will mean that there is a reference point that says, at age 11, I should be able to do these things which relate to good digital skills as part of what happens. And when you look at all of this, what are the outcomes? What have we already seen, bearing in mind the project is still only halfway through? There are a number of very, very good indicators that are coming through. Firstly, the children are definitely more engaged. If you say to a child you're going to be using technology, whether it's tablets or laptops or smartphones, that always excites children. And this is the way that a lot of them in Europe work outside of school. This is what they do. So this is a medium with which they are so comfortable that delivering their education through this medium actually excites them. And so we've seen that both learners that are difficult to reach, but learners that otherwise, wouldn't be engaged, or learners from poor backgrounds, are all engaging much more in the education process. We also find that they are beginning to get the sort of skills that have been talked about, in communication, in collaboration, in self-paced work, in working in groups and projects. And where are we, how are we seeing this? Well, firstly, through school inspections. We're already finding that school inspectors are beginning to, make comments about this. And secondly, in the exam results, where you are, now beginning to see that, the number of people that are passing exams well are beginning to, is beginning to increase even in areas of deprivation or poverty. And when you look at that, the examination system hasn't changed. The only thing that has changed is the way the curriculum is delivered. So for me, I think, when we talk about education and a lot of the issues, I think the thing that we have to bear in mind is that education has a purpose. 70% of jobs today require digital skills, and yet a lot of our education systems don't deliver it. And I think it's something that we seriously need to look at urgently. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Mr. Sangrashka. Now, we've heard two presentations, both covering very, very important part of the education systems, evaluation and assessment, and technology. We'll now very soon open the floor, but I will just ask a couple of questions, and then I want you to take part, and you will then be encouraged to obviously add to on other areas that we haven't covered so far. I would like to start on technology. We heard this morning from Andreas Schleicher a rather worrying presentation. Now, we know on the one hand that technology is there to stay, and it's very, very important, and it is clearly part of the solution to a lot of the various challenges we are facing. But what was disturbing was obviously what he presented, that a lot of countries that have invested a lot in technology do not get very good results when it comes to learning achievement. What is wrong here, and what can we do to make sure that obviously technology should improve and enhance learning achievement and not the opposite?
I think that's right, and that is exactly what we've seen in a lot of the world. I think the reality is that when you think of technology outside of education, technology has two purposes. One is to increase productivity, and the other is to automate what humans are doing. And I think, sadly, a lot of the technology projects that have happened in education have been about automation and not transformation. So what we've looked at is, we have a textbook. Why don't we digitize it and put it on a device? So what have we achieved? We've created, a digital version, but there's no change. We give homework on a piece of paper. Well, let's send it electronically and get it back electronically, and the learner types. What have we achieved? We've taught them to type. We haven't changed anything. And I think this is fundamentally the problem, that if we want to achieve the sort of transformation and the outcomes, what we have to do is use the technology for what it's good for, which is that it can give strong feedback very quickly. It can allow all sorts of collaboration, all sorts of interaction, rich media, and build those sorts of things into the technology, so that what we're not trying to do is teach the same old way, but through a small screen.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are other opinions about this. Just I want to turn back to Madame Aiello before I give the floor to the rest. I don't think anybody will question the importance of evaluation and assessment, but obviously the question there as well is how that can help to improve learning outcome and the performance of education systems. Could you say a little bit more, you mentioned it in your presentation, how this actually could be a better part of the response to the enormous challenge Europe is facing right now concerning refugees and the enormous increase in numbers of young people coming to many of the European countries?
I think as many other educational problems, they have a multi-characteristic. One is to take in charge the identity of this person, because it is the starting point. Otherwise, we can enroll them in improving their learning, and also to recognize the dignity, the identity of this person from which to start. The other part is the problem about teachers, because teachers do not have this experience to manage the different cultural problem, the different person, and also many other things. In Italy, we are also on similar problem, also if very different, because we have very big differences from south and north of the country in order of the outcomes. So many teachers do many things, because if you think that in Milan in 2008 they started to use different tests in original language of the immigrants, it was not a crisis situation, but they start in this way. Now, Mazara del Vallo, that is in Sicily, and you know that Sicily is very close to the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, so you can see that this is a very big problem, and they do the test in Arabic, in French, and in a different language, because also Arabic is not the Arabic from high-stake situation, but is Arabic like a dialect, because the head of the teachers that I know have to arrange the translation with person that know the dialect, the different dialect of Arabic person that live there. So you can understand that it is a very big problem that just one person can't solve. And we have to invest also with this, for this problem, with many other economic resources. But at the end, I think also that when we start to evaluation the school, just moving from the everyday life of the teacher, we can consider this important, not just only the objective that they have to reach, but in order to permit the teacher to reflect on their own practices. This is the starting point to change. And if evaluation starts from this everyday life, we can wait for a change in these practices. It is a very complex problem, and we have to recognize the different point from which we have to add something in order to solve or to decrease the problem, because I think it's very difficult to solve.
Thank you very much. So, teachers have a key role to play. Teachers are part of a system, education systems, which I think in most countries are conservative by nature, rather looking backwards than forwards. They're big bureaucratic monsters. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that, but we need education systems to react faster and to be a key player in finding solutions. Now, teachers, they are there to help and take part in finding the solutions. I'm sure you would agree with me. But that means they have to be empowered, they have to also receive appropriate training, and I think another important aspect is that schools need to have a certain degree of autonomy, so that part of the solutions and response to some of these challenges, which are also local per definition, has to come from the schools and teachers themselves. Hence, you need a rather decentralized education system, which is not the case in all countries. Now, rote learning, I think that is also part of the problem. If we're coming back to social inclusion and all of the problems around there, rote learning is not, I think you will agree, the best way to go to develop the skills needed to learn to live together, which is the overarching goal, I think, for most education systems. I remember myself when I went to school, we learned hymns by heart. I don't know what kind of skills that developed in me, but perhaps this is important in my later life. Now, I want to open the floor. You are pleased to come up with your additional positions, your comments, and or questions to one of the two panelists. When you do take the floor, please present who you are and if you want to ask questions, to who you want to ask the questions. Please, I think we already had a gentleman who wanted to take the floor, and we have microphones. It's coming down there.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to this debate. My name is Simon Hayhoe. I'm a teacher trainer from Canterbury Christ Church University in the UK, and I'm also a Centre Research Associate at the London School of Economics.
Yep.
Sorry, I'll introduce myself again. Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Simon Hayhoe. I'm a senior lecturer and teacher trainer at Canterbury Christ Church University in the UK in Kent, and also a Centre Research Associate at the London School of Economics. I've got to declare an interest, especially with technology education, in that up until 4 or 5 years ago, I was a secondary head of department in the UK, head of ICT in the UK. I've got to be honest, I think the debate is slightly simple or simplistic in a certain way, because I think when we're talking about rote learning, we're not looking at other things that schools provide. And what we're talking about is the measurables within schools, rather than the other parts of learning within schools. So, for example, if you give a piece of homework in via a computer, or you digitize a book, you're actually giving that student, when they're learning those things, quite very useful soft skills. And I'm particularly interested in this because it's an area of my research. I particularly work with, because I'm a program director for a Master of Arts and an Ed.D. for Special Needs and Inclusion, which is my other declaration of interest. And what we do is actually encourage students, particularly with special educational needs, to use computing, because they will need those devices a lot more in future than students from mainstream. And what I mean in particular is, for example, if you're a disabled student in future and you want to apply for some benefits to actually get some support for your disability, for example, you'll need to use a computer. So the soft skills that are coming in with those use of computers, even for something as simple as homework or actually just emailing a teacher are massively important. And we don't really see these skills as being measurable skills. And quite often as I say, I'm in a university myself, we quite often overlook these when we're actually teaching teacher training students, but these are vitally important skills. So I would like to talk up for the soft skills that are learnt in schools, and UK and Italian schools. I'm familiar with the Italian education system as well. And I think, unfortunately, we're not looking at the immeasurables, only the measurables within those schools when we're looking at these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these very important additional comments. Now I think we'll take a few more questions and then I'll ask the panelists. Yes?
Thank you very much. I'm Faryal Khan from UNESCO Doha office. I fully concur on the importance of new information technologies. But as was mentioned earlier this morning, till 1990, we did not have most of these technologies. So this very rapid transformation regarding the use of technologies and how they are in fact being used by teachers and learners to enhance learning, it remains questionable. And also, as Sven was mentioning earlier, to what extent are teachers actually being trained do they have the capacity to use new information technologies, to be innovative in how they are teaching. Because what we are seeing in the Gulf region and some maybe other parts of the world, while many schools today now are equipped with some new equipments and internet facilities and so forth, they are not really adequately being used. So I would like to learn more about, how one can be more effective to enhance critical learning, critical analysis, problem solving, and the skills matrix that you were referring to earlier. How we can enhance the use of ICT to enable more skills that are required for children and learners today. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, Faryal. We came from the same UNESCO family. Yes, gentleman down
there. Hello, I am Professor R.K. Suri from India. Well, I have a very important issue to deliberate onto it. As far as you were emphasizing the rote learning, how far it is useful. In my perspective, rote learning has a lot of utility. Predominantly, in terms of the language acquisition and cognitive processes happening, it's the rote learning. All languages in the world are first listen and then learn by alphabets, etc. So it's the rote processes of, if we look at the Indian inscriptions or the mythological books, predominantly they were all orally prescribed and rote learned. So technology could be an important element, but it is again a big barrier in terms of dividing the society. Teacher cannot be replaced. If teacher is replaced, the school system will be completely different. We need to look thoroughly onto that process. And I personally feel that rote learning should also be not undersubscribed, but be given due weightage and value, because it is the values and ethics which comes predominantly by listening and following that rote in a rigor. And the rigor comes by properly listening to someone and then inscribing into your value system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. Gentleman over there, please.
Hi, my name is Dr. Kennedy Mubaiwa. I'm from Zimbabwe. I represent a foundation called Her Life Foundation. My question is on information technology in schools. We are in the process of embarking on trying to digitize as many schools as we can, purely from some of the challenges that we have from the absence of textbooks, the current teacher-pupil ratios, and the basic infrastructure that allows for proper learning. So my question to you, sorry I can't pronounce the name, is what must I not do as I embark on this process? And then secondly, is there any controlled studies that would help in getting us to understand whether there's going to be an encouragement of 21st century skills through the digitization process, or are we still going to be still providing the old way of teaching by just using a different window, like you've just said? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps one more question, and then we will take a new round. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Neil Carberry. I'm Director for Employment and Skills at the CBI, which is the UK's major business organisation. I was very struck this morning by Andreas Schleicher's presentation on the UK schools and the fact that what teachers professed to believe was not what was happening. And in my own experience as a governor of a primary school in England, that's not because teachers don't believe that or would like to do it. It's because what they're measured on and what they're expected to deliver forces them down a different path. And I think one of the issues that many of our European systems have, and it's quite interesting, we sit in a political environment here, is that our politicians are very interested in education. And a lot of what we measure is our inputs and outputs rather than outcomes. So, for instance, technology misspend, we saw a lot of that under the last Labour government in the United Kingdom. That was all about giving a large sum of money to schools to spend on technology, and all that mattered was how big the pound sign was. Likewise, on outputs and outcomes, we standardised tests at primary schools at age 11. That is, in reality, whatever the Chief Inspector says, makes up about 80% of what the school inspection's view of schools are. Now, that's great, and we need to make progress on language and mathematics, absolutely. But if we're talking about a labour market, and I spend my time talking to companies, it's not just about getting onto the technology cycle that's running at the time that you leave school. It's about having the skills and the abilities to jump between the technology cycles that happen after that. So there's a lot more for schools to do. And I'd just be interested in the panel's view on how we can influence our politicians across all of the European states to think more about the outcomes broadly of education rather than the outputs and inputs and the things that will sell well in 3 or 4 years' time in the election, because we need to worry about these children's future in 20 or 30 years' time.
Thank you very much. So let's have a quick response from the two panelists, and then we still have time for a few more questions afterwards. I would like to start with you, Madame Aiello, and the questions on what you measure and turn towards outcome instead of outputs.
Yes,
it's very, very important, and also then what we measure, and sometimes the soft skills or non-cognitive skills are also very important.
Yes, I think that is very important to use a coherent measure from what we have in mind to measure and what is the objective that we have. So I can propose a measure, a bigger use of technology also for evaluation, because if we have aim at measuring, at make visible, also not only measure the different competencies, we can use technology in a very efficient way, because students can say what they are doing, and on my opinion, teachers are too firm, are stopped to the traditional way we measure the competencies. But they can also go in a different way, and the digital instruments can be a very big tool in order to make visible the different competencies, also in the field of language, because language and communication that are very key very important key competencies can show in a digital way, in a better way. All obviously is not a problem of a system evaluation, but in local and in class evaluation, we can use many different tools, much more than teacher normally uses.
Thank you very much. And then over to you, Mrs. Sangrashka. There were several questions on technology.
Yeah, I've made a note, so hopefully I can answer all of them. The first was about soft skills and especially in SEN, and I absolutely agree. Where my concern is that the things that I talked about around emailing and digitization are sometimes the only things that schools do. And as a technology provider, our biggest challenge is to drive usage in the schools. You know, they have tremendous amounts of technology, storage, facilities, but to drive that usage is incredibly difficult. And it's not just us. We work closely with Microsoft, and it's a global challenge. How do we get this, you know, technology that's been put into schools to be used? I think there was a comment about training teachers, and I think it is essential to train teachers because I think it's essential to find out, you know, to develop the new pedagogies that we need around technology. If you have technology, you can't, you know, having a teacher stand at the front in a standard classroom format does not work. You know, the teacher has to learn other ways to teach, other ways to mentor, and other ways to facilitate. And you know, all of these are skills that you know are new, and we need to, I think, learn them. In terms of rote learning, I absolutely agree that there is value to rote learning. Where my concern is that if that's the only way that you learn, the issue is that those aren't all the skills that are necessary for employability today. And you know, in many parts of the world where we work, that is the biggest challenge, that graduates come out of the school system and employers don't think that they're fit for you know, employment. And what they struggle with is that if they then have to spend the next 2 years retraining them, and then they move on, the cost of, you know, acquiring new employees becomes very high, and I think that's a challenge. Digitization and the two questions, what must we not do, and control studies. I think that the problem with digitizing just a textbook is that all you've done is change the medium. I think what you've got to do is change the experience, because once it's on a digital environment, it can become interactive, you can add video, you can, you know, and I think so adding the rich media into it changes the experience of that textbook. I think the other thing that we see is that where people have linked all of these things so that the textbooks are linked to, you know, other free video software like Khan Academy or whatever, actually just changes the way kids learn. You talked about control studies. We did one with Lancaster University in 2010, and I'll give you my card. I'm happy to share all of those with you. What it showed was two things, that there are outcomes in terms of productivity and cost saving because of the use of technology, but there are also outcomes in terms of all the education indicators that we have. And then the final one about influence and politicians. As a CEO of a private company in education, the biggest challenge that we have is that, you know, who is the customer when we are implementing projects? The money is held by politicians and civil servants, and the target is teachers and learners. And when you look at both of them, to satisfy both is incredibly difficult. One has a short-term view around political cycles and elections, and the other is trying to do a complex change management solution. And I think that is where the issue is, that, you know, very rarely do you see long-term, well-thought-out, structured programs. It's about trying to get an impact before the next election, and that's where, you know, a lot of the difficulties come.
Thank you very much. I think we're having competition for some nightclub next door. I don't know if that is on purpose or... I don't think it will disturb us too much. We have a few more minutes, and if there are any additional comments or questions, yes, please. Microphone is coming. Well, he's coming there now, actually, or else you can full speed.
Hi everybody, my name is Yulia. I represent Center for Innovative Education Ukraine. At the moment we go through process, generally in Ukraine, through process of rethinking and transformation of national curriculum. And we really look for opportunity to give more freedom to teachers to become creators of the learning environment, of usage of technologies and so on. Maybe you could share or some good case practices or examples that we should take to consideration, just to not to make some mistakes or to go further with this process. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, yep.
Hello, my name is Justyna Suchecka. I'm a journalist from Poland, and on January I was in London at BET Show, and a huge deal there were BBC project Micro:bit, and I guess that a lot of countries in Europe will take it as an example for how to use it, microcomputer and coding. And I want to ask you, what's your opinion about this project? If it is really that project which can change your education. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Yes, lady over there.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Selena Carmody from a school here in Dubai, Vice Principal. My question to you is, we will, as teachers and educators, we will never be ahead of what's happening next. We always have to second guess what's coming up. What are we doing? I have two questions, actually. What are we doing in order to prepare our teachers to be facilitators of this, and how are we attracting this type of person into the teaching profession? To me, teaching is a vocation, and it's about having the right skill sets, the right competence, critical thinking, attitude. However, the measurement of getting into teacher training is through academics, and I think all of us will have worked with very highly skilled academics. They don't necessarily always make the best teachers or craft the best experiences. You don't have to be an academic to do that. Coming from the Irish education system, one has to get a certain amount of points in your exams in order to be successful and go into teacher training colleges. And I have been in university with many people who I would say perhaps should not have been teachers, but for one reason or another, because they were measured as being successful coming out of our education system, then they were deemed to, in fact, be entitled to become teachers themselves. So what are we doing in order to attract the right people to the teaching vocation? And I say vocation as opposed to profession.
Thank you very much for a very important but difficult question. I think perhaps one more, and then we slowly have to round up. Was there no more? Not as far as I can see. I would have liked, but there's no time to go into that, to have your opinions and views also about the threat that all countries are facing in terrorism and violent prevention of violent behavior, where also education systems is the only tool that governments have at its disposal, have an important role to play. But I think there as well we are coming back to teachers as a key agent, as well as obviously curriculum and other parts of the system. But we have time for a last round. Madame Ayelou, you have anything to add?
I think the problem about teacher training is very, very important, as you know, but I think that they have to show and to acquire many different practices. Maybe that also university, and I really belong to the university, is not the best way to to training a teacher, because many times a teacher have to collaborate, have to share some activity, some very many different activity than in the university, also in our university. I don't know if in yours is different, but they have to learn by contact, by sharing, and so in this way is also the way they can teach collaboration to and the other key competencies to the pupils, immigrants and not immigrants in their classroom.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Sangrashka, some final words, please.
Yeah. 3 quick comments. Firstly, the example. One of the top 50 finalists this year was a lady called Janet Haywood. And I had the pleasure of going to see her classroom. And just to give you a brief example of what she's done. So all of the desks in the classroom are against the back wall. And the classroom is divided into 4 areas. And during the whole lesson, the kids, it's a primary classroom, the kids move from one to the other every half an hour. So at one area, you have the teacher doing normal teaching. In another, you have some sort of collaborative project. Then there's some laptops or desktops where they do something online, and then there is some sort of peer-to-peer learning. And this process in a school that has 60% of the children on free school meals, which is a measure of poverty, has encouraged them to come into school, which is important in itself. But when you look at the results that are coming out of a school like that, they're as good as they've ever been. So I think the process itself actually has a lot to play. The second question was on the microbit, and there's also a product called Raspberry Pi, which has been around for a while. I think these are very good for 2 reasons, because what they do is when people think about computing, they think about websites or programming or whatever. But there's a very strong physical aspect to computing. Computer engineering almost, and I think this encourages that, and I think we need more people to go into that, and if this does that, I think it's great. And finally, this question about teachers. I think the current problem with teachers, or this process, is that a lot of teachers came into the digital era late, and so there are 2 challenges. One is how to get them to use technology, and then how to get them to use technology in the classroom. I think as more teachers, who've come through the born natives or whatever you call them, come through into the teaching profession, they'll have already, been very comfortable with the technology, and I think that will facilitate getting the right sort of teachers in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So then it only remains for me to thank, first of all, the 2 panelists, and then to thank all of you for having taken part in this session. I think we do agree, perhaps there was some, from my part, simplistic statement on the rote learning. Yes, it also serves a purpose, there's no doubt about that, but sometimes there's too much of it. Now, teachers do and will continue to play a key role. So I think all of us will agree that we have to do what we can to see how, from our various parts, we will mobilize all the support to education system, public education systems, and private sector have a very important role to play. But parents, communities, civil society, all the partners will have to contribute to what is, and I think that was also made very clear this morning, education is the key ingredient for sustainable development. Thank you very much.